Morning. I'm Ralph Galen, and always feel like saying I'm not Reverendado, but I wish I was. But Rev Otto did leave me a little note here. He's very kind, very thoughtful, and he said, "Don't worry, Ralph. You'll do great. And if you get nervous, just do what I do. Imagine the congregation in their underwear." And now I'm terrified. Oh gosh. So they tell you in seminary, it's good to start with some humor, and I'm going to start with my favorite Unitarian Universalist joke. This is a joke that defines Unitarian Universalists, and if you resonate with this joke, you are. So it's the French Revolution. It's not a very happy time whatsoever, and people are literally losing their heads. And there's a long line of people that they're lined up for the guillotine, and they bring this person out, just a ordinary citizen, let's say a baker, and they say to this really proud patriot, as they are about to place them on the guillotine, "How do you want it? Facing up or facing down?" And they say bravely, "Facing up." And the blade comes down, head rolls. Next person comes up, they're who knows? They're all we know is they're not a Unitarian. They're music director of the local Catholic church, and so they say the same thing. "How do you want it? Heads up, heads down." And bravely they say, "Bring it on, heads up." And they face the blade. Blade comes down. So they bring the next person up, who does happen to be a Unitarian, and they say, "How do you want it? Heads up, or..." Oh, wait a second! I ruined the whole joke. So they bring somebody else out. Oh my gosh! I'm glad you're laughing. Now that's the whole thing. They bring an e-bike enthusiast to come up, and poor innocent person, and they heads up as a heads up, and the blade comes down. It stops. Miracle of miracles, it stops. So they release the e-bike enthusiast, and they go on their way. The crowd saying, "It's a miracle, it's a miracle." Then they bring the Unitarian. Okay, I know you were waiting. Bring the Unitarian up. "How do you want it? Face up, face down?" "I want it face up." And while they're waiting to pull the string, the Unitarian goes, "Hey, I think I see the problem." Thank you. No, no matter what, I think what defines us is this fearless, almost compulsion to know the truth, because it's the truth that's going to bring us together, and it's our silence and the lies that's going to keep us apart. So it's not my thing to give sermons. You might have figured that out already. I've given about 800 of them. It's generally required of a parish minister. You have to do it. And maybe this is my last one. So I spent a lot of time putting everything in the world that I wanted to put into my last sermon, and then boiled it down to about 15 minutes. But I really wanted to deeply connect with you. I wanted to deeply connect with you at this excruciatingly important time. I prefer that we sat in a circle and talked heart to heart, and perhaps we'll have that chance. If you grew up the way I did, you'd realize how hard it is to be speaking like this. If you ever read Pat Conroy's book, The Great Santini, anybody? Or seen that wonderful movie, Robert Duvall in the title role, you have a good picture of the authoritarian household I grew up in. Like the great Santini, my father was career military in the Navy. The hero in World War II, where two of the ships he served on were torpedoed and sank, never spoke about his experiences. Never. I pieced together his story from outside sources. How, for example, as the chief petty officer in charge of an engine room aboard the USS Lexington, Queen of the Flat Tops, when it was torpedoed and going down, he was among the last to leave the aircraft carrier because he and his crew had to maintain the pumps for as long as possible to pump out the water that they were taking on, to give the other sailors more time to leave the ship. You can imagine him as the engine room took on water, trying to maintain discipline. He was an old man by then. I think he was 23 or 24, and most of the people on his crew were 17, 18, 19. As a young child, I'd remember from time to time sailors, oh, makes me sad, who had served with him would stop by the apartment, didn't speak about what they'd gone through, but they would look at my father with adoration. He was a cool hand in battle. It was peacetime that was a challenge. George Carlin described my father's condition. There's a condition in combat. Most people know about it. It's when a fighting person's nervous system has been stressed to its absolute peak and maximum, can't take any more input. The nervous system has either snapped or it's about to snap. In the First World War, that condition was called shell shock. Almost sounds like the guns themselves. Then the Second World War came along, and the very same combat condition was called battle fatigue. Takes a little longer to say. Then Korea. And the very same combat condition was called operational exhaustion. Sounds like something that happens to your automobile. Finally, the war in Vietnam. And thanks to the lies and deceit surrounding that war, the very same condition was called post-traumatic stress disorder. Still 8 syllables, but we've added a hyphen, and the pain is completely buried under jargon. I'll bet you if we'd still have been calling it shell shock, some of those Vietnam veterans might have gotten the attention they needed at the time. So my brother and I grew up with someone who was walking around shell-shocked. But to make things a little bit simpler, we just would have said he's shell-shocked, and he's more shell-shocked today than ever. Every day it was battle stations. Every task had a life or death urgency to it. I think to mealtimes. Not only was there no talking, let alone singing or, God forbid, whistling, all unnecessary noise by my father's mysterious calculations was not tolerated. If you grated your fork on your teeth, he could go ballistic. From 0 to 60 in a second. Sometimes there would be a rebuke. Other times a hand came out of nowhere and smacked you. Shell shock is passed along from generation to generation. The Black reparations movement recognizes epigenetic transgenerational injury and how the invisible wounds of slavery are manifested over generations, similar to the traumatization that Palestinian children have experienced over decades, where mental health problems are compounded by extreme adverse socioeconomic circumstances and these young victims of political conflict. The PTSD, of course, is worse because the children are being continuously traumatized. Bruce Springsteen captured the traumatization in his iconic song, Born in the USA, where you end up like a dog that's been beat too much till you spend half your life just covering up. It can take a lot of effort to speak up, to speak out. It starts with understanding your situation, being kind to yourself, loving yourself, radically accepting yourself just the way you are. Sometimes it seems as if you are possessed by ghosts and goblins that assert themselves in odd ways at odd times just to trip yourself up. Recovery begins when one honors oneself as having made the very best choices necessary to survive against overwhelming odds. Some people react to the traumatic events in antisocial ways. Some do their best to become invisible or become people pleasers to the extreme. Drugs and alcohol, casual sex may bring relief. There is a reason why one feels a near constant existential dread, as if the world could fall apart at any moment. A hand shoot out of nowhere. Voices in one's head that continually argue that one is no good and has no chance to succeed. If the causes and conditions are not faced, they will wreak havoc. I was just 60 when I learned of some American Vietnam veterans who had fought in Vietnam and were finally dealing with their PTSD, shell shock, as if it had positive value. A psychologist I met on a meditation retreat surprised me when he said that over 90% of these victims he had worked with viewed their shell shock as an incentive to personal and spiritual growth they otherwise wouldn't have made. In the end, they were grateful for their adversity, but it took a lot of work, a lot of good fortune. James Fowler has studied the stages of faith, much like psychologists and sociologists have studied the stages of human development from childhood to adulthood. It doesn't matter what religion you say you are. Within every religion, there are stages one can go through, from literal fundamentalism, even in Unitarian Universalism, to what Fowler calls a universalizing faith that is boundlessly open-minded and open-hearted. It is rare, statistically, for a person to reach this stage of faith. Fowler describes these folks as having a special grace that makes them seem more lucid, more simple, and yet somehow more human than the rest of us. In the Unitarian Universalist curriculum, Tapestry of Faith, we read, people at this stage can become important religious teachers because they have the ability to relate to anyone at any stage and from any faith. They're able to relate without condescension, but at the same time are able to challenge the assumptions that these other stages might have. People at this stage cherish life, but also do not hold onto life too tightly. They put their faith into action, challenging the status quo and working to create justice in the world. That sounds like a nice place to be. And here's the thing, one does not move from one stage of faith to another without pain and sacrifice. There's a kind of inertia that takes place. Oh, I'm in Sunday school, I learned these stories, I'm pretty happy here. One does not move without, because it's not easy or inevitable, most people find a way to back off of the questions that inevitably rock their boat and threaten their community involvement. They make compromises needed to stay where they are. Some folks drop out, never have anything to do with religion again. And some find a religion like ours, which welcomes a sincere struggle to find what's true and good. There's the pain of having to give up one's cherished beliefs about oneself, beliefs that were at the core of one's identity but no longer serve, coming to terms with one's political beliefs or gender identity or chosen profession. Such transformations are why it takes a village to grow a soul. So my vision and my village of a congregation is comprised of such souls. We have to make our own justice in this world. It will not be handed to us. On the contrary, as a survivor of the Attica prison uprising put it, there is no justice, just us. In 2016, people argued whether the incoming administration was fascist. 8 years later, I don't think it's up for a debate. We can't wait for them. We must be prepared for difficult times, including the president-elect. Let's run through this. 5 cabinet picks have been found guilty of committing or abetting sexual abuse. The campaign ran on lies, deceit, and threats. That turns out to be their platform. It feels like the resurgence of the Confederacy and the Jim Crow era. The Stop Terror Financing Bill, supported by both political parties, gives the Treasury Department unilateral authority to strip the tax-exempt status of nonprofits it claims supports terrorism without providing any proof of charges. It may come down to religious institutions. Groups which support a free Palestine will top the list. And despite the American economy's utter dependence on immigrants, and especially undocumented immigrants who work hard, avoid crime, and don't collect their taxes, which go into the common coffer and benefit all of us, absurd claims will be made of the 11 million of our neighbors, 3.3% of the American population. And if your heart isn't beating faster yet, recall that $100 million was spent on anti-trans commercials during the last campaign, blaming Kamala Harris of supporting trans rights, which she never did. If only she had done so. So this week, if you pray, be a good time to pray. Chase Strangio, as Amy Goodman reported, will make history as the first openly transgender lawyer to argue before the Supreme Court. Strangio will argue on behalf of the American Civil Liberty Unions, LGBTQ, and HIV Project on Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming hormone therapies for transgender children, that it is a form of sex discrimination, she will say. This was 2019, there wouldn't even be a case. He says, our hope is that the cultural anxiety about trans people is not going to sway the justices from applying straightforward constitutional principles. We have always resisted. We have always taken care of each other. No matter what happens, that is what we'll do. Let that be our rallying cry as well. If you dig deep enough into the life of any person, you will discover a world of hurt and suffering, the legacy of oppression and traumatization. We're all connected at that level. All oppressions are connected. And if you dig deep enough, you'll find, yet again, the hopes and dreams, the self-awareness and resilience that will make the difference and put us over the top in a world that has never been filled with so much evil. So at this point, although I tried to save the file, my computer crashed. I saved it 3 ways. It's biblical. I saved the file and it vanished. It's a biblical thing. They who save shall be lost. So what you're hearing for the first time, I'm also hearing for the first time. God help us all. I have a big ask. I want us to grow. It's a request, not a demand, except a demand I do make on myself. I want us to grow, not necessarily in numbers. We've got plenty of folks. So the more bodies there are, the more impact we can have. I want us to grow in our faith. I want us to grow in our ability to love and care for each other, and care for the stranger when we know that there are no strangers. The greatest illusion there is, one Zen master said, is to think that I am here and you are there. There is no that. There's no there. There is no other. Do you all know who Bill Russell is? Really? Because there's going to be a clinic on him after the service. Bill Russell, the greatest basketball player who ever lived, but at the same time, he was also a social justice advocate in a very racist Boston at the time in the 60s. And he was very involved with social justice in the Boston area. And after one game, a reporter came up to him and says, "Why are you so interested in other people's children?" And he looked at them like they were, loony. And he said, "There are no other people's children. They're all mine. They're all ours." Let me see if I get this quote. When you realize that there is nothing that exists that is not a part of you, when you realize that there is no one who exists who is not a part of you, when you realize that every criticism you make is a self-criticism, that every judgment you offer is self-judgment, then you will become a light unto the world, a light of unconditional love. Only we. Recently, I contacted my personal email. I don't know if I'm going to be brought up on ethics charges, but I wrote to all the 200 UU ministers in Massachusetts, 10% of all in the United States, and their personal phone. Hello, who is this? No, it's not your cousin from Des Moines. It's me, and I'm asking you to stop the genocide. And here's what you can do. Well, I emailed them and then I texted them, and I got about a dozen responses. I know the mailboxes are really full, but if I saw something in my mailbox that says we can end the genocide now together as UU clergy, I'd open the doggone thing, probably act on it. I did get about a dozen responses. Most of them were, "Who are you? Take me off this list. This seems like spam." What in the world? But we did wind up calling folks, and I want to say this congregation was the first one to respond. When I made the request to the board, will you send a letter on the board's behalf and on the congregation's behalf to all our senators and say, please do not send any more weapons to Israel because it violates 6 US of A laws, starting with the Leahy law, that you cannot give arms or sell arms to a human rights violator. This congregation and 6 others responded. I'm really happy to be here. And of course, Rev Otto said, did my sister-in-law, Heather Concannon was right. Did she sign on? Oh, yes, she did. Great. So this is the seed pod. So my vision is that the revolution we need of love and caring and responsibility begins here and with our UU churches, because we can't count on anybody else. One very practical thing, I go over everything with Rev Otto, and so far he always goes, yeah, that's really great. Then I get stuck trying to make it happen. So I said, we don't have a social justice committee. No, a social action committee. He said, oh yeah, that's better, social action committee. What if we get one going? And the job of the social action committee, again, is not to tell anybody what to do or make them to do more than they're doing already, but to organize and to focus. And every church I've been in, we've had committees like that have 2 projects. One is global, because we have to say that we're in this world and we care about this world. Naturally, the genocide occurs. And the other one, we were thinking about this, and we both said at the same time, shelter, because of the great work that Reverends Aisha and Elizabeth are doing, because we have to show our neighbors that we're doing hands-on things. What happens to the other things in between? We can't lose track of them, so we create a yellow pages. Anybody know what a yellow pages is? I'm knocking on the door. I have a few of them still in my house. If you want one. So we need to make a directory, because we can't lose anything. We have to keep tracking everything in a visible way, because all oppressions, all injustices are interconnected. We're all traumatized. We're all traumatized. I look at what these young children go through, not that you're terrible parents or anything like that, but to see them just, especially when they're like 2 and 3 and they don't have a lot of resources, and they don't get what they want, and they just get so bent out of shape. And of course, you're so loving and kind and supportive that you leave them out of their overwhelm. Darling, I am here for you. So we're all in need of healing. And I never expect anyone to do something that they can't do, but we need to be more focused, more concentrated, and to continually recognize our potential. Trauma, simply put, is not the things that happen to us. They're traumatic, but they happened. Trauma is the inability to live in the present, the here and now, and take up our space. That's the cure. To realize that the events have happened, are over, What remains to tempt us is the conditioning that makes us afraid of our power to be present to one another, to say, darling, I'm here for you, and mean it. Okay, this doesn't leave this room, but sometimes, Nick. Thanks very much. I feel more comfortable in a going back and forth place. Okay, it's left the room. You sometimes poke fun at other religions. I remember somebody lighting a candle and saying that they were a lapsed Catholic, whereas behind me was our organist, who was a confirmed Catholic churchgoer and the most wonderful person in the world. I think she said during the service, I am a Catholic, I haven't lapsed. But many of us were hurt, even disappointed by our former religion, if we had one. There's a great joke about the Jehovah's Witnesses. What happens when you cross a Jehovah's Witness and a Unitarian Universalist? Close. You get somebody who knocks on your door for no apparent reason. During the Nazi era, Jehovah's Witnesses were among the first to be rounded up and sent to the camps. Among the first, because their allegiance to their faith trumped Nazism. In the camps, they shared their food. They didn't have any food, or whatever food they had, they shared it. With whom? Whoever was there. The Amish are sometimes poked fun at because of their antiquated ways, their buggies and conservative dress. They actually live like 40 to 50% of Americans lived until about 1900, when every farmers got electricity and gas-powered vehicles. When a madman entered the school in Nickel Mine, Pennsylvania, and slaughtered the school children, the Amish rose up to forgive the shooter and wound up adopting the surviving family into their community. They would not return violence with violence. When I went to a workshop led by Thich Nhat Hanh with about 40 Vietnam combat vets and their loved ones, never once did Thich Nhat Hanh say to the soldiers who had either killed his family or somebody that he knew, certainly his country people, never once did he say, I forgive you. What he did is he understood. He understood that the enemy was the education and violence that they received from their birth. The way Israeli soldiers are not the enemy, the way they are indoctrinated from cradle to grave to hate non-Israelis, especially Palestinians, and kill with an unthinking vengeance. And all who kill will pay a price. I want to say that I look around me, I don't know who else to ask. We must be the ones to end violence. We can't wait on others, other churches, but be the spark that lights the way. Here's the punchline, if a sermon has a punchline. My brother became very angry with me when my parents died. Sometimes this happens. Ancient wounds. I was the big brother. I had disappointed him. I was his protector. I remember leaving home when I was 16, and I looked back at him, pleading with me to take him with him. And for the next many years, he received the brunt of my father's wrath and rage. And we were reunited. And you can see the two of us side by side, because he contacted me 22 years later. I went into my son's room and I said, Uncle Eli just sent me an email, said he wants to talk. I was crying like I am now. And we talked. I probably talked too much. I should have just listened and listened and listened, but I did listen. His version of events was so different than mine, or rather his version of the legacy He is so nervous. He's never gotten over what happened to him. He talks about my father as if he was a sheer monster. So one day, a couple months ago, he said to me, as we're piecing together my childhood, so much of which I've forgotten, he said, "Do you remember the time you came to me and you asked me if I would help you kill Dad? Kill Dad." I said, "How old was I?" He said, 13. That would have made him 11. Can you fathom this scenario? Somebody comes up to you and says that to you. But so much is the damage. So much is the damage that it causes and twists us. I wanted to bring you a picture of my father, because while my brother will not speak of him, I have a picture on my refrigerator, which is the religious shrine of Unitarian Universalists. And I look at my father every day and I say, "Dad, I love you so much. I love you so much. I wish you were here. I wish I could talk to you. I'd so much love to hear what you have to say to me. And I want to say to you, I didn't say it often enough. I love you. I love you. I love you." I understand him. I understand being a young man trapped in an engine room as water comes up, maybe with a spanner in your hand, threatening the other sailors to stay at their posts and man the turbines and the pumps. The effect this has. He said, by the way, that after that event, they all passed through the galley. And as they passed through the galley, they opened the refrigerator and scooped out handfuls of ice cream. The last maybe they'd ever eat, the last pleasure maybe they'd ever have before jumping overboard. We only have this present moment. We only have this one precious life. We cannot say, "Darling, I'm here for you yesterday or tomorrow," only today, only now, in the present moment. Let us take up our space and cram it full of love and caring and kindness. We start by being ourselves, our whole selves, just as we are. And it takes a little effort. If you're me, I have a lot of quirks and eccentricities and habits, in case you haven't noticed. And it takes some effort to say, "Ralphie, I love you just the way you are." Be yourself. Be yourself. Because why? Well, for one thing, everybody else is taken. You have to be yourself. Get it? Show love to whom? To all who need it, to all who ask, to everyone we encounter who suffers. The best of our ability, to the best of our ability, and together we can multiply the miracles of love that we make. And now for my favorite interim benediction, and the shortest that I know, by Dag Hammarskjöld. Do you know Dag Hammarskjöld? I can't believe that Dag Hammarskjöld actually lived and walked this earth, but he was the UN rapporteur or general secretary, and he brought this deep abiding love with him wherever he went in that battle war-torn world we live in. To all that has been, thanks. To all that will be, yes.